Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from our, I'm sure you would have seen the nod to the 4th of July US links, and it's actually particularly pertinent there because this next panel is going to talk about lessons that were learned and observations made during our Boston Bootcamp competition that the trip went in April after the selection process. As a little bit of a background to it, I guess it was an event in Boston, I don't know, well over a year ago now, where I was on a panel and we talked about how can we get more traction and dialogue and deal flow between Boston and the UK. And I've been doing this job just over 20 years, in one guise or another. Every year I've had at least one conversation, we're going to do more with Boston. And then we didn't do anything. And, you know, deals happen, and if there's nothing for us to do, that's fine. But we just seem to think we're going to do that, and then nothing happened. After 20 years, I was getting a bit depressing to keep talking about it and do nothing. So either we have to do something or stop talking about it. And it seemed like a more productive thing to do something. I was grateful to the One Nucleus board that agreed that One Nucleus could fund a Boston Bootcamp for a small group of companies to go really dig under the bonnet of what goes on in Boston, how it works, what trends were happening, what you needed to do to get traction and understand it, and then be able to bring that set of learnings back to the wider network so that we all benefit from it. And ideally, we get a much more constructive dialogue going forward. And we keep that dialogue going and building. But we were really grateful to a group of sponsors for the bootcamp, one of which was Taylor Wessing. And the four winners who are sat in front of you, I'm sure, will introduce themselves shortly. So without more from me, I'm going to hand to Ross from Taylor Wessing to talk us through what did we learn in Boston.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tony, and hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. Really excited about this panel because it was a fantastic 4 days in Boston a couple of months ago. And just to maybe set the scene, I mean, I think the reason it was important, and the reason, you know, just to kind of reiterate what Tony was saying is, you know, for all of the companies that we, you know, work with in the life sciences ecosystem, whether here in Cambridge or more further afield, like the US is very much part of its their own strategies, whether it's a place to look to hire talent from, whether it's a place to raise money from, big patient populations, obviously, and or pharma. And so I've been to Boston kind of several times, but no one has ever kind of sat me down and just said, well, actually, this is what the whole ecosystem looks like. This is what the real estate piece looks like, the HR piece, et cetera. And so the boot camp, which was spread over 4 days, really kind of, you know, got under the skin of each of the kind of elements, which we're going to go through in the next 40 minutes. And so that's like 10 minutes per day, as I was saying earlier. So without further ado, so I'm Ross McNaughton. I'm a partner at Taylor Wessing. I'm based here in Cambridge. I sit in the venture capital team, one of about 40 people here in the UK, and I look after life sciences investments. And I will start with Mike. Maybe if you could introduce yourself and maybe say as well what it was you were looking to get out of the Boston Bootcamp.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Mike Davies. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Carocell Bio. Carocell Bio are developing novel anti-inflammatory peptides to more safely treat serious inflammatory diseases. Our lead is in atopic dermatitis or eczema, where we've shown it works in biopsies of from people with eczema, and we've shown that it will not only switch off inflammation, it will prevent the disease coming back and also potentially delay the aging of the skin. It affects 10% of the worldwide population and is a massive market. Boston was fantastic. I had a great time. My reason to go into Boston, reason to go to every meeting, to everything, is to look for investment to develop our peptides. It's as simple as that. I know a lot about the US because I've got a lot of things happening in the US, but from an investment point of view, it was interesting. I can tell more about that later on. The weather was great, and the traffic was terrible, and we walked 20,000 steps a day. Well, I did, but there you go, Boston.
Great. Okay, Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Binley. I'm the CSO and effectively CEO of a company called Ikarovec, which is a gene therapy company that's based in Norwich. We've been developing gene therapies to treat chronic eye diseases such as age-related macular degeneration. And we've been operational since 2020 with a very small seed fund. So by the time we sort of applied for the Boston Bootcamp, we were at the point where we were doing a fundraise. So it's a perfect opportunity for us. We've been halfway through this fundraise, effectively. I can say that now because it was halfway through. I didn't know that at the time. So we applied, and the reason really was to sort of just understand that Boston ecosystem, you know, the fundraising opportunities over there, and really just sort of best practices of how to sort of act and integrate yourself into the sort of US, fundraising. So a bit similar to you, Mike, but yeah. We're a company of 4 as well, so just worth knowing, very small company.
We're almost twice as big. We're 7.
Oh, we're so ordered. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay. Hazel?
Hi, I'm Hazel Jones. I'm CEO of Enhanced Genomics. So it's actually a platform company, but the value and impact is really in the 3D genomic data. So I was a little bit scared by the last talk about cybersecurity, and it is real. I clicked on a DocuSign link because I click on them every other day. And so IT had to shut my laptop down completely. But 3D genomics can really inform target identification and prioritization. It's also got huge links in disease stratification. And we can do some of it biologically by putting samples on the platform, but we can also do it bioinformatically. And just for those of you that sort of don't know what 3D genomics is yet, so your genome is a long piece of string. And actually in the nucleus, it's all screwed up in like a big ball of spaghetti. And it's those touch points that are really important for gene regulation. And if you imagine all your cells have the same genome, but your immune cell or your cardiac cell or your brain cell has a different 3D genome, we can tell the difference, and that difference drives the function. And then in disease, you get dysregulation of that function, and actually 95% of disease SNPs do fall in that non-coding genome. And we can make those links there by looking at a T cell profile, a activated T cell, and then a diseased T cell. So we're just trying to build that at the moment. And the reason I was interested in Boston was, funny enough, for investors, which is a common theme. But it wasn't just investors. It was connections to those investors. You have to have the warm introduction. Also being able to stratify them. I'm looking for very much data and tech bio investors as opposed to biotech investors. I was also looking for collaborations with the farmers because we want to actually do those use cases. And hopefully, if we get both of those, we'll be able to build a US footprint. And similar to Ross, I mean, I've been going to Boston for about 20 years, you know, the AZ Waltham site, and I didn't know all the different areas, and the amount we learned, even in the first day, was just phenomenal. So, yeah, it's been a great experience.
Great. Matthew?
Oh, and we're 23 people, so we're in size order.
We're in size order. I'm the biggest one. So yes, my name is Matthew Fyfe. I work for Storm Therapeutics, which is a biotech company a clinical stage biotech company based on this science park. We're 35 people. We're working on inhibiting RNA modifying enzymes, primarily for oncology. And we have a phase 1 asset, STC15, that's just showing some really exciting data at ASCO. We want to go out to Boston to learn more about the investment scene over there. Primarily, we're looking for a 50 million plus raise in the near future. We're looking to see what it would be like to transition over to the US from the UK. As biotechs evolve and their clinical assets progress, I think the centre of gravity moves from the UK more over towards the US. We've actually already got a US CEO and a US CBO, but we'll be looking to get a clinical organisation, get financial people in there. So we wanted to find out all about how we could do that, how we could get a US presence. And I think Ross talked about that in his session about some of the legal aspects. So yeah, it was a really great time, and as you can tell, we're all having a good laugh here. It was a really fun time, but we learned a huge amount, and it wasn't just all about the money. There was a lot of other learning about things that they do different in the United States compared to here. For example, they don't say bespoke, they say tailored.
Oh, you've ruined it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the purpose of this session is really to try and impart some of the learnings that that you guys picked up over there. And I think like breaking that down into, you know, 3 different distinct topics. So let's talk first of all about, you know, the Boston ecosystem itself. Then we'll go on to talk about some of the operational opportunities and challenges, both around kind of HR, real estate, IP, and then finally let's talk about funding, whether the streets of Boston are paved with gold or otherwise. But let's start with the Boston ecosystem, because we had, like day one, there was some quite interesting discussions from the likes of MassBio, the equivalent of One Nucleus over there, Massachusetts Life Sciences Centre. They spoke to us as well. And Katie, I think you were going to pick up on some of the kind of interesting things around how the ecosystem there is funded and is developed compared to, say, Cambridge UK, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fascinating. I mean, perhaps I'm just naive and don't know much, but obviously I know where Boston is. But I mean, we sat in a really beautiful building in Seaport that was just being converted. I mean, these are just such beautiful buildings, they're all mirrored. And we had 3 fantastic sessions. And one of them was about sort of how the funding works in America and with the sort of federal system that they have and the state governments that they have and the amount of funding that actually just goes back into Boston and how it was sort of created. So I think there was something like since 2007, I think there's been $1 billion invested into the Boston sort of life sciences ecosystem, which is absolutely incredible. And I think that's leveraged about 5.3 billion. Something like that. So you can sort of imagine, so the whole of the population is behind this, effectively, because you've got this state funding going back into the system. And I think there was also talk about how they sort of build up the sort of population of scientists there. So they're sort of leveraging non-scientists into the ecosystem. There's tax incentives for, you know, hiring new people, so on companies. And there's also this idea about sort of sharing equipment. So purchasing kind of quite high cost equipment and sharing that between companies. I don't really think that really happens.
But people are scared to do it here in this country.
Maybe in an innovation type centre they do, but this was actually from, you know, big companies that are set up, you know, buying bits of equipment and sharing them. There was incentives to do that, for example. So there was lots of, you know, kind of stuff I didn't know and didn't know was even possible.
Yeah, it felt from my side much more collaborative from that side
more
of
than
things.
I thought it would be.
People were helping each other, which we tend not to here. Well, we're different, but that side of things was really interesting to see.
But yeah, and I think one other sort of fact that came out as well was the fact that maybe 2% of the US population's in Boston, but they get 10% of that NIH funding annually. And that's kind of quite incredible. I mean, so it's just building and building.
It was all self-perpetuating.
Self-building.
So the wages, obviously, in Massachusetts are very high. I think the biotech salary average was 3 times that in the UK. And that obviously brings in big tax revenues, which allows them to develop the infrastructure more. And so it's self-reinforcing. It's a really very, very impressive setup that they have in Massachusetts. And I mean, in 2005, I was looking at some of the slides the other day. It's over tripled the number of people working in biopharma in the last 20 years. And you know, in 2005, I think there was 1 big pharma working in Massachusetts. Now there's 18 of the top 20. So it's just, it is possible to change things. And I think Massachusetts shows how it has done that in the past 20 years.
And I think what the Boston Bootcamp actually gave is the knowledge, some of these numbers. And I thought I knew Boston a little bit well. I used to go a lot because of AZ. I was out in Waltham, so I knew there was a centre of it. But, you know, we got the breakdown of the different areas, you know, where the manufacturing's growing, where the tiny biotechs, you know, they tend to go to Kendall Square, and then they get too big and they have to move out. That's why Seaport is getting so big. And I think it's just putting that knowledge together with the connections that we got. So we actually can go back and ask people. You know, that collaborative element really came out, didn't it? Oh, we can help you if it's just a desk you need, if it's a shared lab, if you want to set up an office or a lab. You know, there was someone of every flavour to help. So I think that knowledge and that connections takes the ideas and the strategy we have into what I'm doing, and that is an actual plan. You know, that I can actually take to the board that feels real because I know the information. And that's a step change for a company that's early as me, in the fact that I know, right, I'm going to do this and this for the next 6 months, and when I'm ready, I'm going to press this button, and this and this will happen. And I've got people like yourself that can, you know, really facilitate that when we're ready.
Yeah. And the other interesting point was it very nearly didn't happen. It was almost, it was going to be the space center was going to be there. Because, JFK was from Massachusetts, wanted to set up NASA there. He got assassinated. And then Lyndon Johnson, when he took the presidency, who was from Texas, and so he ended up putting NASA in Houston instead. So, but for that, then the really Massachusetts ecosystem might have been materially different. But you're right. Like the fact that they have such a devolved system over there, and that the funding system has kind of enabled the ecosystem over there to really just snowball and really focus on life sciences and take the whole community with them. It feels like that that has just grown and grown and grown. And also in Cambridge, there's sort of parallels, like that point about taking the whole community with you. There's a whole Innovate Cambridge, organization been set up, and Kathy's here, and so like that has got the same sort of parallels as over there as well. So anyway, so it's really interesting. Moving on a little bit to expansion opportunities and challenges, and we can talk about kind of HR and real estate, but let's start with the challenges. The opportunities, and let's sort of think about what it is that you took away from why would you set up in Boston? What sort of things would draw you there? I don't know, maybe Mike, if you start seeing how you're furthest away.
Why would you set up in Boston? I don't think I would set up in Boston.
Okay, because the challenges are too
expensive.
Too expensive.
It's if I got 190,000 a year as a wage, it'd be fantastic. But the fact that 50% goes away in tax and whatever, you end up with as much as you get here, or not, as the case may be. Boston, it was just so expensive, and to be able to, what I loved about it was the ecosystem, the help. You could, if you had an idea, you could get support and money to develop that idea so that you got to grant stage. You then apply for the grants, and if you were lucky enough to get an NIH grant, it's 100% funding, which we don't do in this country. No. Bizarrely, we get 70% from Innovate UK.
50 sometimes.
And less. So as an early stage company in this country, you've got to get the rest through equity. That's the only way you can do it. So you get diluted early on. In the US, you can get pretty far without being diluted, which is fantastic if you're a biotech company. With the grant scheme over there, of course, they're a bigger country, so there's more money. It's bigger. I always describe it as having an extra naught on the end, in wages and in investment. It has huge benefits, but Boston, to me, would be too expensive.
Do you think it depends what you're trying to set up, though? Because I agree it's expensive. I would definitely put 1 or 2 people there because it has that critical mass of science as an office. If I was going to put 100 people in a lab, I would probably come back to one nucleus and go, this is slightly different. I can't afford to build it, in central. I know I could build it out in Waltham, but actually where else is there? And I think we've mentioned a couple of other, Texas and stuff, and Florida. They're all trying to copy Boston now. Yes. So I think it is a little bit of what you're trying to do in your plan, and we got a little bit of that of talking, across the 4 of us, of we're all trying to do something slightly different at a different time stage.
But I'm not sure I'm totally in agreement with you, Mike, because it's so vibrant there. There is so much going on, and you've got everything that you want. Yes. And the reason that Boston is so successful compared to other big US cities, such as New York and Chicago, is that in New York and Chicago, it's not all concentrated. It's all over the place. So in Boston, it's really, really concentrated. You've got the knowledge hub, effectively, Kendall Square, Cambridge. But then as you move out into the state, where it gets cheaper, you get the manufacturing. So yes, I agree with you, it is expensive, but I think we're learning as UK biotech. So afterwards, I actually, Nick Blevins, who I saw from Cushman Wakefield, he recommended that we contact Bicycle Therapeutics, who's a company that has done this in the past, and I went afterwards and asked them about it, and they said yes, they would have opened a US office, but they wouldn't have done the US labs
Yeah.
Because the US labs are much more expensive than to run the lab
It's a bit
here.
of the same with San Francisco, and it's harder with San Francisco because that's not such an easy time zone for us here in the Cambridge, UK. But again, there's a talents there. It's a bit more techie, IT, and data, which is obviously what I'm after. But that's why I said it sort of depends what you're trying to do. But it opened up to, I've now got someone I can go and talk to, or I know the questions that I want to go to Bicycle, and that's very different to where I was at the beginning of this year when I want to open a US office.
Well, that's it. I would just have been, you just open an office up. It's fine.
Legal
but,
and tax.
But you need to have a plan. You need to. So what we learned was you need to have a chief financial officer over there in the first place if you want to do an IPO.
Fractionally.
Oh, fractionally.
Yeah.
You're getting me back for using your. So you've completely put me off my track.
Fractional CFO to help you.
So, but yes, I wouldn't have known that either. I wouldn't have known that you need to really have quite a defined plan. Get a chief financial officer in there, first of all, who knows how to do an IPO on the NASDAQ, if that's what you're after. But ultimately, for a UK company, a biotech, you will most likely be going to NASDAQ.
And there's also an element about now is not a bad time to do it, because there was like a bunch of real estate that we saw that was just unpopulated.
No, the building we were in was
completely
almost
empty.
It was astonishing. That atrium was just astonishing.
And there was no one
Opulence.
Beautiful building, mirrored, overlooking the bay. It was just glorious.
Stunning.
I would go there just for the office.
Yeah. So I think that, the takeaways were, the salary costs were materially more expensive. I think the real estate costs were materially more, albeit there are deals to be had because, effectively the biotech industry in Boston has dipped a little bit over the last couple of years, and so people are not taking as much real estate. There are solutions for if you did want to set up a lab. There's like a sort of WeWork equivalent of like LabWorks, I think they call it. Like, so there are sort of some opportunities there. And then as well, Hazel, as you touched on, like the proximity to the UK and the operational ability to manage is obviously, it's sort of fairly, sort of self-evident. Matthew, we did have a good session on IP as well. Did you want to just touch on that?
I realise there are IP lawyers, and I've seen quite a few IP lawyers. Sagittarius, and so I'm quite scared. I'm not an IP person, but basically the bottom line was that IP. In this country, if we're filing patent applications, we're going to want to get it granted in America. So there's not a huge amount of difference. But there are ways, if you really want to expedite a US patent, there is a track 1. So there are ways to do it, or you could file your US patent at the same time as you file your PCT. But in general, though, we're always going to, we basically talked with IP lawyers who said they've never seen a deal without US, Europe, Japan, and that's what you're going to need. So there's not a great amount of difference.
Yeah, it felt to me like the IP sort of element wasn't going to be a point of friction if you were going to do that sort of expansion. So just conscious of time. So let's talk about funding for a little bit, and just to kind of like pick out a few sort of stats as to sort of why the funding is relevant. And just before we went, the BIA released their reports from 2023 just on financing. And at seed stage, the US money is coming into UK companies. US investors took up 12% of all the monies invested in the UK, whereas at seed stage it was 76%. And then when you sort of extrapolate that down out to Series B, the amount of money going into companies in the UK from UK investors had shrunk by to almost a third, to just over a third, 35%. And similarly, over the last 5 years, 2019 through 2023, the amount of overseas UK monies going into companies has sort of shrunk by 74% to 57%. And so that kind of shows us a couple of things. So it shows that, and we see this, on day to day in our practice, but the UK's got a really, really strong ecosystem in terms of being, translational science, being able to start up companies. But then as soon as you get to late stage investments, certainly investments over sort of 20 or 30 million plus, there's international investors on the ticket without question. And so what we've seen is that, yes, there are some, US investors that will come in at seed stage, but on the whole, they tend to come in at slightly later rounds. But equally, there has also been a proliferation over the years, the last few years, of overseas investors being really more comfortable with coming into UK companies, and that's for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that doing business transatlantically has been made easier because of being able to do like Teams and Zoom calls, etc. I think the US investors have this sense that the UK's got some amazing sort of science behind it, but then the ecosystem here is perhaps a little bit less picked over, so there's some valuation arbitrage that they can get, and also the ability to go further with your runway with the same amount of money because of the sort of equivalent costs in both jurisdictions, I think is appealing to them as well. And so we had a session on funding just to kind of like see if the sort of general trends in numbers and the sort of narrative behind them really played out. And Mike, did you want to lead us off on that as to what your learnings were from your discussions?
My learnings were quite simple, really. When I talked about what we were doing, I generally say we're looking for money to get to regulatory approval for clinical trials, which we're looking for 10 to 12 million to get to regulatory approval for clinical trials. They said they weren't interested in that. Their only interest is clinical proof of concept. So ask for 30 to 40 to 50 million is what they said, which was interesting because that's not what you get over here. So the numbers are bigger, and they're more likely to, no one's going to give you 50 million just like that. They'll tranche it, whatever, but they're more to give you more so that you don't slow down. You can keep going, so you can see into the distance that the money's already there, which was a fantastic way of doing things and something that we could learn from here. The other thing that struck me from the investment side of things was the NIH grants, that everybody goes in for NIH grants over there, and as you say, many more go into Boston than the rest of the US. The NIH grants are 100%.
You said that twice.
Full step. I'm just astounded that we don't do that in this country. It's bizarre, but compared to what they do.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Fair enough. I don't know, Hazel, maybe?
Yeah, so I'd echo your second point, on the amount, I would say double it and probably double it again. And I've actually had proof of that from coming back in one of the US investors I was talking to, and they were like, we won't really look if it's less than 20 million. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm like, okay. So very different style in that, and I think it does give you that security to be bolder and therefore, probably give a bigger return on the investment. The second one really is about the style. So your pitch deck that you use here is not suitable for the US audience. It has got to be bigger, bolder, that sort of brash element. And no, not that you believe it, that this is what you're going to do. It's got to be very strong and very powerful. Mm-hmm. And they're hearing it from the US companies going to the US investors. So we've got to change our British style and actually compete against them in that piece and be that. I mean, our science is as good, if not better, because obviously we're in Cambridge. Yeah, but they've got the story, they've got the message, and they've got the way about presenting it, the story. So I've definitely changed a lot of what I'm doing now, and I'm doing some of that for the UK as well, because it's just it's not harmful, it's just a bit more confident.
Yeah, I think you really have to prepare if you're. I realised how much prep you need to do if you want to get funding from the US. I think that was my take home. You don't just rock up and think it's paved with gold, you said originally. It really isn't. You need to prepare, and it is quite different. Plan ahead, look at, for example, is your website kind of US friendly? I mean, it might be simple, but is it, I mean, they do their websites differently to the way we do. So I've been looking at that, for example, and, they're much more simpler and a bit more pizzazzy. The way they do their pitches, make use of all the networks that you've got and those soft introductions. And I think it's you've got to build it up over time, I think. So really plan ahead is what I was, and it was, for me, it was probably too early to go. And, raising funds here has been difficult over the last year. It's no better in the US. So it wasn't suddenly, that's going to fix it. go to the US, you're going to get funding, you know, at early stage. You know, they're less likely to fund at that early stage.
But there's quite a bit about that warm introduction.
But get it all warmed up, get your plans simmering, you know.
Build the relationships, say you're going to deliver this over the next 3 to 6 months, and then go back to them 6 months later with, I've done what I said I was going to do, and now I would like some money, and this is what I'd like, because actually we've just shown we can do it. And it's building that trust and confidence in not only the science behind the company, but the team that's in there, and that came out quite a few times, that actually that warm introduction is part of it, but actually they need to know you personally and trust you, and that you've got the right team, depending, you know, we're all doing slightly different things, but, you know, you'll say you're about to do this, how do they know that? And I think actually quite often you end up, or the US investors will want a US CFO or someone part-time, a CMO or something like that, because they know the system, and that, you know, it does strengthen the senior team that are delivering, you know, the whole vision of the company.
Yeah. So I think one of the points you mentioned, that we do have an advantage from a cost effectiveness perspective in the UK. There still was, quite surprisingly to my mind, quite a geography centred. You know, people in Boston, they've got everything there. And so to my mind, I mean, Mike, for example, Mike looking for his 10 million, you know, it sounded like the guy, if they had 20, they would rather do it for 20 million in Boston, because they knew everybody there, and they had a track record. So it's really building that track record, and really, you know, I think we need to advertise that we've got top-notch science here, that we can really...
and the experience that...
And the experience as well, because we do have, you know, pharma companies that you come from AstraZeneca that have done fantastic training. So if we can emphasise that we've got these cost advantages, we can do things effectively.
But it's a little bit of that peer mentoring as well. We have so many serial entrepreneurs in Cambridge that have done it successfully, and it's like, I'm not on my own, you know, they may not be in my company, but, you know, have them advisors on your website, because it shows then you've actually got that very experienced support behind you as well, and that's, they've sort of taken a little bit of everything, whereas I thought it was all, you know, you turn up, you do your pitch, that's what counts, and that's sort of the last piece. Yes. It's all the bit that goes in the sort of 6 months, 12 months before, that's building your reputation, giving them the science insights, showing you can deliver, more than actually walking into that room and that 30 minutes or whatever you get to try and grab the money.
And part of that preparation as well is like identifying those investors that are and are not interested in it. Because I mean, some of them have been head down focused on company creation for the last 3 years, and there has been some, you know, astounding like companies coming out stealth with astounding numbers. And so it's really just kind of like making sure that you're going into the right companies at the right investors.
Well, and you've done your research on them.
Yes,
exactly.
You know, have they funded something similar to you before? And then there's a balance, because if they've done like a load of gene therapy, maybe they don't want to do another. They do, you know, so but you can see that in their portfolio. You can know the deals they've done. And, you know, just as they do the due diligence on you, they sort of expect you to have done it on them, and go and be a bit bolder in asking those questions about them. You know, how many times a year do you fund UK companies and that piece? So I've definitely now got a list of things that I'll actually go and interrogate investors that, you know, I started there and I've sort of built over the last 3 months as I'm going, oh, that's another thing that's really interesting.
Finding where they are in their fund cycles, another one. Yeah.
If they are, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, no, that's great. And then and you touched on the benefit of soft intros, and so that's obviously like,
they're the best.
You know, really important. So yeah, exactly. So that's really important. So just in terms of kind of like wrapping up, so maybe 7 minutes. So like let's sort of do a sort of wrap up, and then see if we've got time for questions. But just in terms of like, you know, key headline takeaways, Mike. Like maybe start with you. Like what have you done on the back of the boot camp, and where are you taking those learnings going forward?
On the back of the boot camp, you know, kind of what's been said, it's do the due diligence on the investors, which I did, but do it in more detail. Find out what they've done in the areas that we're in. I think that's important from this side anyway. I also felt that the Mexican food was great. Sorry,
don't talk about Brazilians.
She was worried about you.
Sorry, Alicia.
It's a private joke.
I love the ecosystem. I love the fact that they helped. And if you've got an idea, you talk to people about it. You know, don't give your ideas away, but talk to people about it. And there's people there to help, and there's money there to help it get off the ground, we don't have that here, which is something that we could do here. And here we need that follow-on fund, which we just don't have, which they do.
Yeah, we have some, just not.
We have some, but
Yeah,
it's hard
it's
to
not
get.
as,
It's
yes,
hard to get.
exactly. I mean, it sounds odd, but in a way, it's kind of, you know, as you're raising funds, you have to just, you can't just think of it in a kind of like territorial manner. You just got to think cross-border, right, and just sort of see what you can achieve. But anyway, Katie.
It's similar really, and just sort of planning ahead. I think, you know, we're just sort of finalising our sort of funding now, and sort of planning. You know, you never stop fundraising, you never stop growing, and just sort of knowing that we've made connections, maintaining those connections that we've got, which it's been brilliant actually, meeting up with different ones and just having the odd chat. And for instance, you know, we're looking at our website and looking at our sort of slightly Americanizing things, maintaining the accent, because I think that's not the authenticity and the genuineness. That came out. I don't know how you can get that when you're pizzazzing it up, but
No.
you know, there's a bit of a balance somewhere between that. But you know, I remember our board was saying you need to be more American actually, and I kind of get what they meant after going to Boston. In your pitching, it's very different.
It's a style again, isn't it?
You don't just have teams; you have stellar teams and things like that. You know, it's like I feel kind of creepy
So we went to an
saying
event. We went to a mass bio event where there was pitches, and I've never seen anything like it. Some of the
They
pitches.
had walking on music, didn't they?
It was like that. It was like Rocky. It was
bizarre.
It was really it was amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Just one thing I would say, just as a general thing, I think one thing they didn't do very well in Boston, they've created this wonderful buildings, they've got car parks, which we probably suffer from a little bit, not here, but the transport system is absolutely terrible. And they really need to do, I mean, seriously bad. The metro, everything, you know, it's ridiculous.
It is really bad, and it kind of goes to the point
and
about
so they just bear that in mind if you go there.
Exactly.
Walk, it's easier.
And where you set up, because a lot of people commute in from a very long distance and stuff. But Hazel.
Yeah, well, I always said before going out that I had a US strategy. It was to set up a US footprint. And I believed I actually did know what I was talking about. I think in the 3 months since then, I now have a plan. Yeah. I know how I'm going to do it, when I do certain bits, and actually, you know, what those tipping points are. So it's brought a lot of clarity, but it's also then when talking to the board or new investors, it's actually I know which bits of money I need when and what they're going to deliver back for the impact of the company. So, you know, it is about, for me, on the data, it's having that US footprint that I need first and offices as opposed to a lab. Mm-hmm. But actually, if we're going to do lots of pharma partners and get those, then it's actually building the lab. And I've got a place to start. And I think, yes, Mike, I would go across and compare. But it's just the amount of learning and knowledge we got in that week. And then I think, you know, from what Kate was saying, what we've had since, you know, we can now reach out, you know, we can reach back out to Tony. Yeah. This is a big ecosystem here. And every little bit sort of fits into the puzzle that makes it, I don't know, just more confident about actually then delivering that to your board when you don't have a robust spreadsheet and everything. It's just, you know, when you're there as a CEO, you're talking about ideas and you're then asking other people to go and put all the detail in. Mm-hmm. And I know what detail I'm asking now, and I'm, you know, bringing the rest of my team up to speed so that we can, you know, deliver that hopefully in the next couple of years.
Great. Matthew?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of new contacts with East Coast BD people that we didn't have before, so that's really been a help. Coming back though, however, I was quite dejected actually. I was quite dejected just seeing how I felt that we were far behind in the UK. And that's shown by the last BIA financing report that I think Ross has mentioned, where Massachusetts, the state, or maybe it's just even Boston, brought in 4 times more than the whole of the UK. So I think we as people in UK biotech, and we need to try and talk to government, because that's what's happening. Massachusetts is coming from a standing start 20 years ago, and they're miles ahead of us, but we hear things from our government talking about life sciences, superpower, and it's all hot air. Yeah, you're laughing, Tony, it's all hot air. So how can we, how can we as part of the UK biotech community really try and get government to try and be on our side, to try and get it so that we can be less understated, more bolshy and push for things. So that was what I think we all need to try and make an effort to try and get this UK biotech up to international, it isn't European standards, but up towards where Boston is.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand.
I agree.
The clock has literally gone
It's gone
red.
red.
Gone red.
50 seconds left.
But just to say, I mean, I think I speak for all of us. I mean, like One Nucleus, it was a great, few
fantastic.
days.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you.
Alicia
Yeah,
and
thanks.
Tony,
Thanks a
like in particular, did a great job of putting it on and the logistics and everything. So yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. I should make sure, Alicia, put your heart and soul into getting this.
Yeah.
I think the pleasing bit to hear really out of that, and I think Hazel, you summed it up, was the point of One Nucleus doing it really, was to say the lessons have come back and everything, but it was to see someone come back saying, now I've got confidence in the plan I'm putting together. And it's about building that confidence where you can go and be more bolshy and say what you want.
Yeah,
And it's giving you a decision tree and a plan, a way to plan, and I hope that's what translates across, and we'll do many more discussions around elements of that. But thank you all for applying, well done for winning, and for giving us your time and the feedback and insight from it. It was great spending time with you as a group discussing what you'd heard during a day and how it was then sort of sanity checking what they'd heard. And you could see those real-time discussions happen about, well, what did this mean then? And people maybe interpreted it slightly differently, but it gave a lot of real depth of what was going on there. So thank you for your time and support of the sponsors and like yourselves, Ross. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Usually about sometime during the day of On Helix for several years, the chief exec of BioMed has made a trip over from the West Coast, usually come over to tell us or be here when we're getting rid of a prime minister, choosing a prime minister, debating whether we should do either of those two things or just generally what's been unstable. This year, for various reasons, Tim Schoen wasn't able to make it to come and choose the prime minister with us. But we have got Orestis from BioMed, because I think one thing we shouldn't underestimate, and it got echoed in some of that, actually the building we were in that they were referring to was the Seaport Science Centre that BioMed have just refurbed in the Seaport area. And it was a stunning location, and we were hosted there. But Orestis, it'd be great to have your view from a BioMed perspective, how you see this landscape. Because, Cambridge is great here, but we are in a global ecosystem. Orestis, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon all. Again, I'd like to express the apologies of Tim, my colleague. He couldn't be here, unfortunately, today, and sends his apologies. As you said, we were joking actually about this earlier via text. I said, last time you were here, we had a new prime minister. Well, that lasted 40 days, but then he came back and we had another prime minister, and hopefully this one will last a bit longer and a bit more stability, which I think we need. So for the next session, Connecting Innovation Globally, we'll give you a bit of an overview about BioMed Realty, probably from my standpoint, more of a local outlook, but also looking at some of the other markets that we operate in the US. Let me see if I can get this one to work to the next slide. Oh, the green one, sorry. Here we go. There we are. Perfect. So the company celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. So we've been around for 20 years, set up in the US, and we expanded in the UK in 2012 with the acquisition of Granta Park here in Cambridge. What we saw in Cambridge is, some of the characteristics that the previous panel talked about, specifically about the common fundamentals that Cambridge shares with a lot of the other core markets that we invest in globally. But effectively, the business has grown both in the UK and in the US. You see here some of my colleagues on the screen. And I
think what I'll do first is I'll probably jump to the next slide just to talk a bit about the footprint that you see here. So over the 20 years, the business has grown over a number of different geographies. Boston, Cambridge, Mass, as the previous panel talked about their experience there, is our biggest market, as you can see there, by quite a margin. And then we've got a number of markets in the west coast of the US, so Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Boulder in Colorado more recently, and then obviously, as I mentioned, Cambridge, UK. We've been here for 10 years now. 16 million square feet of operational real estate and a pipeline of just under 3 million square feet for development. Some of it we have here in Cambridge. Again, providing us the opportunity to grow our footprint globally. I think what is different in a way between the business model that we operate in, which is more of a platform-led approach, which means that we run a lot of these functions in-house compared to just offering the real estate. So it's also the infrastructure that comes with it, and having teams on the ground that are sort of quite accustomed about the product itself. Sort of life sciences, has a number of mission-critical functions, that the buildings have to perform, and therefore being able to have a team on the ground that understands the mechanics, of the buildings, the performance of the buildings, is vitally important to make sure that the science that takes place within it can be, advanced at the, right pace without any risk associated with that. If we go back one, we can talk a bit about sort of our, sort of the last 10 years, as I mentioned, since we've been here. You'll see that it's not all doom and gloom. The sector has been growing. In fact, in some of the metrics that we're tracking, we've seen some sort of substantial growth. And as I was saying, just earlier at the break, we've obviously, we'll see what happens later today, but I think, sort of reflecting on some of the sentiment, if you like, especially as far as Cambridge is concerned, the UK has achieved quite a lot with limited resources. I was fascinated hearing about the panel earlier, how amazing things are overseas and sort of, the amount of, capital that is available, which is obviously fantastic, but at the same time, I think what we have achieved here, with, what is often regarded as limited resources is also equally quite impressive. And I think we need to be bolder in that way about how we, demonstrate that when we're talking to either government or, our peers overseas and so on. I'll do a bit of a sort of deeper dive with the platform itself. I mentioned earlier about the platform approach. So you'll see here some of the functions that we have in-house. Again, that enables us to get a deep understanding of each market within which we operate. Having teams on the ground in each of our geographies gives us an understanding about what is, mission critical to that particular market, because there are some differences that we can delve into as well as part of this presentation. But effectively, some of the common themes that we see is when it comes to leasing and some of the sort of the cross-pollination of companies popping up in different locations. We've heard earlier about the panel, how critical it is to have a presence, in some of the other markets. That can also be enabled here. And then again, understanding the nuances of things like local planning regimes or laws, and how do you then are able to deliver more supply to that market in a seamless way by understanding the specifics of that. I mentioned a bit earlier about sort of our Cambridge footprint. You can see here through this aerial shot all the locations within which we're active. Sort of from Granta Park, our partnership here with Babraham Research Campus. We'll come a bit more into that in a moment. There is a site that we acquired a couple of years ago, more sort of central to Cambridge, at the Cambridge International Technology Park. And then we've got a site as well on Cambridge Science Park. And this is a bit more about the pipeline. So, we've been active in Cambridge over the last, 12 years. We've delivered a number of buildings. That is a combination across primarily two segments of the market. If I'm looking at sort of the breadth of real estate solutions that can be offered, is sort of what I would regard sort of early stage, incubation, inception, where perhaps there is more of a slightly different operating model. Companies that expect more services, as obviously, they're growing, they're relying upon the incubation facility to provide some of the supplemental services and perhaps some access to equipment or resources that may be available ad hoc. And then we look at sort of the scale-up space, which again provides more flexibility and adaptability, but perhaps also more autonomy in that sense. And then you see some of the bigger sort of corporates as companies enter sort of a more mature phase. They want a bit more autonomy. They want a bit more control over the asset as well. And a lot of the resources, are by then in-house. So that comes with the control in operating. But we've got experience across that whole spectrum, as you see here. And this is looking a bit more about the examples that I just mentioned, which we'll do a bit more of a deeper dive. But we started the collaboration here with Babraham Research Campus, one of the sort of constituents, if you like, of what we call the sort of the Cambridge ecosystem, very much pioneering on the incubation, early stage, and sort of nurturing businesses throughout that cycle. And then the collaboration, on the BioMed at Babraham site, which is on campus here, as you see here, which provides us for scale-up space. Again, critically tapping into some of the services that the team is able to offer on site to enable that growth. And then sort of, again, more on the mature side, some of the names that you see there with whom we've worked with here in Cambridge over the last few years. So this slide is talking a bit about sustainability and ESG. Of course, that is becoming increasingly important, and it's something that we have invested a lot of effort and resourcing and understanding how the market responds, what are the priorities, and how critically through the operation of 60 million square feet of real estate, we can actually harness a lot of that data and then go back as we operate or design buildings to make improvements. And we've seen that over the last sort of 10, 15 years with introductions of renewable technologies, looking at critical infrastructure. I think in Cambridge we've had issues, that we're all familiar with, in terms of the pressure on the grid, more recently water issues. I think we have a responsibility as operators to make sure that we respond to those, to enable that success to continue, and introducing technologies whereby we can provide that sort of reliable performance of the buildings is quite important. By doing that with less of an impact on the environment and the natural capital, of which we're very blessed, of course, in Cambridge. We've got some fantastic natural capital surrounding us. Here's some of the examples at Granta Park. So you will see some of the operating assets there. There is also a pipeline of schemes that's coming forward. On the next slide, we can look at one of those, which is currently nearing completion at One Granta. This is, again, targeting a multi-let opportunity for companies that can come in and utilize the space that is being delivered, in terms of its performance, very much catering for laboratory uses, but it retains the flexibility so we can work with incoming tenants here to make adaptations and meet their specific needs. This is a model that we've introduced a couple of years ago. It's, again, looking at speed to market, for sort of growing businesses. When we're looking at being able to respond at a shorter period of time, because one of the challenges that we've faced historically is real estate takes a long time to deliver, whether it's design or planning or construction. You're talking about a multitude of years, and companies sometimes, as they go through a growing phase, they need access to that real estate much sooner. So in designing spaces that are both flexible and adaptable at short notice, or within a certain window of time, that makes it still viable for the business, they become more desirable, especially for the businesses that are on the sort of the growing phase of their journey. And a similar model here is what we've introduced with BioMed at Babraham, the buildings that we have on this campus. Talking about Babraham, I just wanted to touch on a number of themes that you see here. Again, very, very fortunate to be operating in an ecosystem like Cambridge, where you have these constituents. We often take these things for granted, but I think if we're looking at Cambridge and what makes Cambridge very successful, is very much the network. The ability to connect into what is here. The knowledge sharing capabilities of organizations that have come before, and therefore learning from successes, but also from lessons from people that have tried this before us. I think the community and networks that are existing on this campus are quite important. Tapping into organizations, sharing knowledge. The peer-to-peer support, as we see here, knowledge exchange. The team is running a number of roundtables with CEOs, which are equally very important when you're a business that is in a growing phase. Sort of being able to share ideas and learn from others, is quite invaluable. A lot of talk has been spent about obviously access to capital, which is critically important, but also experience and access to knowledge and sort of management skills is also equally important. We see that in Cambridge, access to some of the angel investors that exist in the city as well, mission critical. And then access to equipment and skills. We mentioned earlier some of the cost that it takes to operate or install some of these critical pieces of infrastructure, whether it's electron microscopes or so on. Being able to access that is quite important, again, for growing businesses where they don't have the ability to do that in-house. But this is the scheme that I mentioned earlier, the BioMed at Babraham scheme, which we delivered in 2020, and more recently we have delivered a joint venture with Babraham Research Campus in Building B960, which effectively builds on that strong relationship and success of the earlier phases, and again looking at capitalizing on some of these lessons where we can bring fully fitted facilities with access to equipment, access to the research and access to the resources for the teams that operate on this campus. And again, speed to market is critically important here because they're able to access this, fitted space, fully fitted laboratories with full adaptation and flexibility as well in how we deliver the spaces. Finally, I wanted to say a few words about a great program that the team here have been running for a number of years, Accelerate at Babraham, for which we are a proud sponsor. I know Kathryn and the team have done a fantastic job over 5 cohorts so far with 26 companies. And again, that is another example of the great successes of Cambridge, being able to provide programs like that, which give access to mentorship, they give access to capital, access to bespoke facilities here to allow these companies, over a period of time to advance their scientific research and get access to the knowledge, but also being able to provide investor days with pitches and therefore, enable them to commence their journey and grow. And I think on the next slide, we'll see some of these examples that I just mentioned of the 26 companies that have come before. You'll see some of the successes here and some of the capital that was raised over that period of time, with over £45 million to date invested in these businesses, and a valuation north of 90 million so far, which is quite impressive. If you think about these are companies that have started in what is arguably a challenging environment from a macroeconomic perspective as well. And then this year we have the 2024 cohort that you see here on the picture. So we wish them the best of luck as they start the journey. They're great hands with the team here, and hopefully we'll see them up on the earlier slide in years to come as well. So that's it for me. I don't know if there's time for any questions, but I think we'll follow with the panel as well.
If you join the panel,
Sure.
I think, since you'll be on the panel, Orestis, we'll save the questions for that discussion. Thank you. I guess just while I'm waiting for the final panel to come up, I'll cover off some of the things of rounding up, which will mean less time between the panel and drinks for me at the end to hold you back. But I think it's kind of, I was hearing on the radio earlier that in 1862 on this date, as well as it being an important date on Helix elections, Independence Day for our US friends, on this date, Lewis Carroll first spoke to a group of friends when they were on a boating trip on the River Isis about his ideas of writing a book about this girl, Alice, who goes through the looking glass to this quirky world where everything is different. And it made me think when I was driving along to that if you sat in this conference, maybe even only 5 years ago, and then you fast forward and Alice, the life scientist, sat 5 years later in this room today hearing what we've heard about how tech is coming into start of play, how everything's gone globalized and interactive and connected, how cybersecurity is a big thing, AI has come through. I think Alice, the life scientist, might well have felt she'd gone through that looking glass from 5 years ago to today. It's a very different sector, but the rate of change is phenomenal. And I think just sitting here today, here in the panels, just brought it home to me just how rapidly things are changing. And we have to change with it. Cambridge is changing here. But how is Cambridge changing? Because it's now such a connected sector and we need to address global health needs, not just down the road. And we can't be just down the road. So there's a lot of messaging being developed locally by Innovate Cambridge, Cambridge University Health Partners, CBC, with the Mayor's Office as well. And that's all going to help us get out there and tell the story better. Go out and be confident when we go and make that pitch to collaborators in Massachusetts as clusters or North Carolina or on the West Coast. So I think in that sense, it felt fitting for the end of this, having heard about the Boston Bootcamp. We see examples of how the real estate plays like BioMed, how you can facilitate a lot of that with the other stakeholders. But actually innovation happens everywhere. I grew up in a village in Wales where there were probably less people than are sat in this room now, to be honest, and I was related to most of them. That's just the way Wales rocks, you know. That was a very small village. But actually we started, lots of these clusters start as small villages, but now it's much more global. And I think COVID showed us how global that village is and how scientists collaborate. So over to Barbara Domayne-Hayman, who's going to take us through innovation in a global village.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tony, and it's a real honour to facilitate this last panel. Very conscious of the fact that we're standing between basically you and the drinks. So we're going to keep it as lively as possible and really be punchy and finish right on time. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to ask all of our panellists. We have a fantastic collection here of very, very diverse panellists who are addressing this question of connecting global innovation. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves very briefly, just 1 or 2 minutes, and then we're going to discuss some themes, going to jump straight into the themes, and hopefully have a good discussion and maybe have some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to introduce myself at the end. So Michel, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you so much, and hello everybody. My name is Michel de Baar. I'm working in the stellar team, so to say, of the Global Business Development and Licensing Group within MSD. I'm responsible within Europe for scouting and evaluating opportunities in 3 therapeutic areas, which is immunology, cardiometabolic diseases, as well as infectious diseases and vaccines. And we're clearly a global operating company, about 72,000 people in roughly 150 countries. So I think I hopefully can provide some insights on that.
Great, thanks, Michel. Kathryn.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Chapman. I've had to travel a long way today to get here. Basically, I'm a life science researcher by training in academia and industry in Boston and Cambridge here, as well as Manchester. But basically what I've been doing over the last 15 years is trying to create innovation ecosystems and thinking what is needed within those ecosystems to create more innovation and reduce the barriers to innovation. And so I'm currently Director of Science and Entrepreneurship at the Babraham Research Campus, and a lot of the things that Orestis mentioned, absolutely fantastic activities here, but I'm also incoming Executive Director of Innovate Cambridge, which you've heard a few times today.
Great, thank you. Orestis.
Thank you. So Orestis Tzortzoglou, Vice President with BioMed Realty, the business, development of life science real estate.
And thank you for the very nice keynote. So that's great. Phil.
Hi everyone, Philip Spearpoint. I'm a partner with EY-Parthenon Life Sciences based in London. Primarily our major focus within the life sciences group is strategy consulting across R&D, commercial, and then market access, which is the pricing and reimbursement of medicines. And so we support life sciences clients, pharma, medtech, etc., to help realise their strategies and crystallise really what they're trying to do globally, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And Claire.
Thanks, Barbara. My name's Claire Thompson. I'm Chief Exec of Agility Life Sciences. We're an award-winning formulation development CDMO. We work primarily with small and medium-sized biotechs to turn their badly behaved molecules, they're all badly behaved, into products that give them the best chance of success in preclinical studies and allow them to be accelerated onto clinic. And I have a stellar tribe of 14 scientists.
Thank you. And just to introduce myself, so I'm Barbara Domayne-Hayman. I wear a variety of different hats. I'm on the operational side. I'm Chief Business Officer of a biotech company called Therapeutics. I'm also on the investment side here in Cambridge, Cambridge Enterprise Ventures on the investment committee, and also LifeArc Ventures. And perhaps most interestingly for here, I'm entrepreneur in residence at the Francis Crick Institute, where I co-founded and am now chair of a program called KQ Labs, which is actually very relevant to some of the discussions we've had earlier today around tech bio. So basically, the program is called KQ Labs, it's KQ being the knowledge quarter around King's Cross, and it's for data-driven health startups, basically at very early stage, so pre-seed to seed stage. We select 10 companies each year from all across the UK, and we run them through an intensive program to get them investor ready. And quick plug, our applications are open for our cohort 7, closing date 12th of August. So any tech bio early stage companies do have a look at KQ Labs. So I think we've had a really interesting day actually, and the last panel discussion around Boston I think really highlighted some of the interesting aspects around the global innovation. So we're going to kick off with a few themes here, some of which will overlap, some of which are actually different. So Michel, perhaps you could start off by talking to us a bit more about your role. And I mean, obviously, MSD is a massively global company. Your role in actually seeking out innovation in your area, how that interacts globally. And maybe first of all, say something about the fantastic news that MSD is actually building a facility in London. I mean, I think we don't celebrate enough. We have 2 major pharma companies in the UK. We're basically getting a third massive research capability in the UK, which I think is tremendous news. So maybe tell us a bit more about the latest on that.
Sure, I can definitely expand a little bit on that. A couple of years ago, in the meantime already, we decided to set up a discovery lab here in the UK. So that is in addition to the operational activities that we have already in the UK, that is manufacturing, sales, marketing, etc. And the Discovery Lab coincides in practically all the different areas in the world with the business development group as well. So that was the reason why we set up here in London as well, having access to the enormous wealth of science, and we heard it earlier from Matthew and others, that there's enormous good science here in the UK. Transport and link connections are very good, so we decided to build a new facility at King's Cross in London, at Euston Road, 1.3 billion investment, so it's quite significant, and part of that will also provide housing for a lot of wet lab scientists. Currently we employ around 70 of the scientists already. We have to grow to at least 150. And the current focus of the group is on neuroscience, but we're going to expand this summer also with a new group in immunology. So we're starting to really build momentum here. What does that mean in relationship to the question that we're actually looking at? Although it sounds like a lot of people, like 70 in neuroscience and maybe 40, 50 in immunology, that's not a real big group for our size at least. If we look at Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the main hub is for immunology, there's roughly 400 people working. So the team in London initially will be relatively small. That also means that if they want to really provide impact, they will have to start collaborating with a lot of players here in the biotech as well as academic institutes, primarily in the UK, but also in the rest of Europe. So we're really looking to bank and on all the knowledge and expertise that is really in the area. So coming back to that sort of village idea, but within a global setting.
And so that's within your remit as well, to actually look for those academic collaborations in around Europe as well? Or?
We help with that from the business development and licensing team, but we have a separate group for more the transactional part. So once we identified teams that we want to work with, there's a separate group that contractually makes all the arrangements.
Okay.
My personal job day-to-day is more search and evaluation, as I mentioned earlier, in the different areas. And I'm part of a team, and I said stellar team, but it is a good team, I must honestly say. And we are all responsible for certain geography, and in that way we cover the world and we try to be the global player. What we do is constant interactions between my counterparts in other parts of the world. And if I see, for example, a molecule that is targeting an interesting target in, let's say, cardiometabolic, I have immediately the connections with my other colleagues around the world to see if they also have some projects in the same target, in the same sphere. And we start comparing the data packages of these molecules and of these programs to ultimately decide which one is the best fitting with us that we want to transact on. So it's a really global playfield for us, but we are very much focused on more the village and the local environment community.
No, it's really interesting. And I mean, I know from personal experience that you have a really good record-keeping system. So if you speak to Merck anywhere in the world, it's recorded. And I know from personal experience, if you try and talk to them in one place and then you come back in another place, they'll say, oh yeah, but you spoke to somebody else in this area. So which was actually quite impressive, and actually more so, I think, than a lot of other companies have. So
yep, it is. Yeah. It's a bespoke or tailored system.
Right.
So it's yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Michel. So Kathryn, I think moving on to a different theme. I mean, obviously, you are immersed in the Cambridge ecosystem completely. What do you feel we can learn from other ecosystems globally? And what do others do well? And what aspects of that can we translate into what we do in the UK?
So I think the first thing to say, and when we heard the panel before, is that we know what the ingredients are to make a good innovation ecosystem. So you need that bold vision, you need a joint strategy, you need the funding and capital, you need the infrastructure, and you need the people and the talent. We know that, and we have it here. So we have all the ingredients. So I think the difference, and I think it came across in the panel, is the scale. It's the scale and it's the ambition and the porosity, I think, of people between academia and industry. And I think Boston is a really, really good example of that. And within Boston, one of the big things is that focused investment, 1 billion over 10 years in the life sciences to create more life science jobs. Simple as that. 1 billion in Cambridge to create more life science jobs. Yes, I'm sure we could do something on the same scale. So to me, it really is scale and ambition. And I think some of the other things, when you look at Station F, for instance, in Paris, that's another one, right? There's 30 accelerator programs there. There are 300 VC firms linked to that, government departments, and it's the second most visited place in Paris. That's the scale and ambition. I really think that we can really do something big, and we should be aiming for that. And I think that's what we can learn. But I think also the other thing to think about is the ecosystems that have created that economic growth, but that economic growth has then created prosperity back to the country. Because we're not just creating economic growth for the sake of economic growth, we're creating economic growth so that everybody can have a better way of life. So there are countries, Sweden, Austria, Switzerland, Taiwan with the semiconductor industry, they have really shown that they've got a high growth economy, but they don't have some of the same levels of inequality. And the key things around that, I think there's two main things. One is about making sure that the vocational and technical and other skills and workforce that are needed around the sector that we're investing in is equally as important as that academic innovation base. And the second thing is thinking that it's not just about that initial technology innovation, that game-changing technology, it's how that is then adapted and diffused and society use it, whether it be a healthcare or a technology or AI or whatever. So I think those are the things that we can learn, and those carrying on those incremental changes and having the support to do that's really important. So we can look to the rest of the world and we can learn, I think, in order to make what we're doing here in the UK much bigger and better.
Yeah, so scale and ambition and obviously getting that investment in.
Yeah.
But I think also the point that you made there about trying to ensure that inequalities don't become exacerbated is a really important one. And I think we've seen that in San Francisco, that's really happened to quite a shocking degree in some respects. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting. I mean, in our pre-call, Michel, you mentioned I think to create jobs for apprenticeships, for all levels of skills is really, really important. And you mentioned a really interesting example in the Netherlands about a factory, a mock factory. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Indeed, it came up. I'm not a huge expert in it, but I know that within the Leiden Bioscience Institute, indeed to create a skill sets and to train people working in a GMP environment and everything around it, QA, QC, etc. They build a mock factory where people can go in indeed and be trained properly to be operational immediately from day one once they finish the courses in the school to operate and work in those factories indeed. And it's a different type of skill set that you need than when you go into a laboratory or anything like so. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting.
And I think in Massachusetts as well, the part of the Mass Leads Act is mass talent. And it's that big investment in the talent that's needed, working with the businesses. What do the businesses actually need? And then creating that talent locally and regionally.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Yeah, thank you. So, Orestis, I mean, obviously you've talked a little bit in your keynote about this, but can you expand a little bit more? I mean, what are the learnings that you feel you can bring the most from all your experience in the US, across the US, and what can you bring to the UK that can be transposed or translated, and what bits actually are different and you think actually wouldn't work to transplant here?
Sure. If I can start with the second part, there's
sure.
bits that are different. I think obviously there will always be cultural change, differences and sort of habits that perhaps different parts of the world are accustomed to. We heard on the previous panel about transport, for example, being a good example. Obviously the US is a very, even in the big urban centers, a very car, dominated society. The public infrastructure in, not many cities in the US you would say is reliable in sort of, being able to jump on a train and get somewhere. When I go to Boston, regrettably often either walk or use Uber. The T is not very reliable. We've got, I think even in Cambridge, much better infrastructure, in terms of reliability, even though a lot of
not
times
the traffic, though.
But you think about Cambridge, UK, every time my colleagues come over, there's another station popping up. We are fortunate, in the last 10 years, we've had 2 more stations, Cambridge North and another one coming now, Cambridge South. And hopefully, if we get a bit more commitment from the next government, whichever that may be, we get funding for CSET, which will enable our southern cluster to benefit as well from a guided busway. So I think the will is there to do some of these major infrastructure points, that are more sustainable, more reliable, and perhaps more desirable as well, because you're not stuck in traffic, on an 8-lane highway in the US. In terms of sort of the lessons learned, even if we go back sort of 10 years that we've been in this market, what we certainly have seen is a shift, in how real estate responds to those changing needs of science. And 15 years ago, you were a number of parks in and around Cambridge. More of what I would describe as sort of the 1990s, out of town business park model. Buildings, with a number of car parking spaces. People would drive in the morning, undertake the business, and then leave in the afternoon. And there was sort of limited sort of connectivity, if you like, or a campus feel for the biggest part. I'm not saying every park was the same, but certainly that's what we experienced at Granta when we acquired that asset. So bringing in amenity and programming, which is a very sort of US driven approach, has made a huge difference in how people respond. Again, in similar localities, Cambridge is a city that historically has developed its science park as satellite to the city centre. Sort of getting there, requires us to provide a level of services and infrastructure that you would find in a city centre, but obviously, out of town, those didn't necessarily exist. So, at Granta, we've invested heavily over the last 10 years in providing amenities, and that is sort of expressed through 40,000 square feet leisure centre and gym with climbing walls, swimming pools, tennis courts, squash courts, you name it. A new nursery that we delivered there. More recently, we've converted a space as a social hub. Just under 3,000 square feet. We call it the clubhouse. So again, serving our tenant base. We understand that after hours, you need somewhere to sort of hang out after work, sort of have some team building events. So providing all that infrastructure and then providing a programming on site to do that is also important. But then also from the real estate perspective, historically what used to happen is, the big pharma would build their facilities, they would operate them, and then, for organic reasons, some would move out, and these spaces would then be backfilled by growing businesses. Therefore, they would have little choice, on what they were inheriting. A lot of that was already sized up for a bigger farm, and with adaptations that made it work. But looking at more bespoke solutions that are flexible and adaptable and actually do meet 100% the requirements of the tenant base is important. And we've seen that sort of, in the last 5 years with more of the product coming online, how people respond to that. So those are just a couple of the lessons that we've learned. And, obviously we keep learning because as we operate real estate in an organic fashion, you do get results back from operating the asset. We talked a bit about climate change and the impact that has, and I think that's going to be a more important element of it moving forward. The reliance on natural resources and how we respond to that. So that's another element I think that we will be focusing on quite strongly in years ahead.
No, that's interesting, and I think that we might come back to that climate change later on if we have time. So, I mean, just building on your point there, I mean, you said, some big out-of-town developments, but then, obviously in Boston, there's also a lot right in the heart of the city. So it's almost, it's a bit like, I mean, this is a bit of an insult, but it's a bit like, supermarkets. You've got your Tesco, you've got the big Tesco out of town, and you've got the Tesco in the city, which you can pop into. But I mean, I think in Cambridge, I mean, I think wearing your new hat, Kathryn, I mean, I think there are thoughts to have things in the centre as well as on the outskirts.
Yeah, and seeing how that all fits together, because I think in the centre of Cambridge, there's certainly within the Innovate Cambridge strategy a call for a big innovation hub, hence why the kind of talking about Station F. But the idea behind that is to have that central innovation where the companies are really small, they're together, there's enough critical mass to attract investors in from the US, because you've got 200, 300 companies there. But actually, it's then having the links to be able to move to the research campus here, to biomedical campus, to Granta Park. So that bit exists, but I think we've got to get more fueled in at the front end to enable us to fill the pipeline of lab space that's being built at the moment around the edges.
So kind of like a lab central type of
exactly,
vibe.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I mean, picking up on another theme that Orestis mentioned, which is infrastructure, I mean, the fact that MSD is building the new facility in King's Cross, where you're literally, I mean, I look at the hole in the ground that is created regularly. I mean, you're literally across the road from King's Cross and St Pancras Station, and you're less than 10 minutes walk to Euston. So was that a major factor in the choice of location?
Absolutely. Connections, because we had a lot of people coming in for a day or for maybe a couple of weeks, they need to be able to move easily in and out. And also the employees from MSD, we travel quite a bit. We also need to be able to get very quickly around. Plus, of course, if you are in the centre of London, you also need to provide easy transport links for employees to come into the office every day or as much as they come. So it's definitely a very conscious decision to sit in the QA, KQ center.
Yeah,
yes,
the knowledge portion, indeed. Yes, which is interesting. And I mean, likewise, the Crick, I remember when it was first announced that the Francis Crick Institute was going to be built right in the heart of London in King's Cross, everyone thought they were insane. I mean, like, why would you do that? But actually the fact that you can literally come out of St Pancras Station, you cross the road and you're in the Crick, was inspired because it has absolutely stimulated collaboration. People come from continental Europe, it's so easy, or from anywhere in the UK. You just literally cross the road, you're in the institute, and it makes such a difference.
Yeah, it does make a difference. And the whole idea with this building is, there's two things which I think are interesting in it. The ground floor will be completely open for the audience, so everybody can walk in. There will be probably exhibits, and there will be a lecture hall or an auditorium where people can provide lectures that can use it for schools or anything alike. So that's one part. The other part is, I mentioned earlier, the laboratories. There's about 150 people going to work in laboratories, or potentially even more. Laboratories are for a lot of people, let's say the general audience, a black box, and they don't really know what's happening. They find it quite scary. So the decision was taken to put it completely at the front at Euston Road, and everything is glass. So people can look straight in what's happening in the laboratories, to create that transparency, to create that openness, so people hopefully feel a bit more trust within what scientists are doing, basically.
That's really interesting, actually. And I mean, with the Crick, actually, it's the same. You have at all the bottom, there's the laboratories that the school kids visit. So we have all these school kids coming in and actually seeing what a lab looks like, and that's right in the front of the building with the glass. So I think you're right. It's actually showing people, this is not intimidating. This is for everybody. So yeah, exactly. Great. So Phil, let's switch gears a little bit. And we've talked a bit about global, connecting globally. But of course, if you're looking at regulatory aspects, and particularly if you're looking at market access and pricing and reimbursement, you're really zooming down to a country level, because each country is very different. So talk to us a little bit about all of that aspect of your work.
Yes, thanks, Barbara. So this is very much a change in gear, so to speak. So when we think about developing medicines, from discovery to preclin to clinical research, everybody's trying to get to different points. If you're a large pharma like Michel's from, you're bringing that to approval, market access. Or if you're a smaller biotech, maybe you're looking for a partner in phase 2, phase 3. But ultimately, it's the two key points, which are the regulatory approval, so the approval of risk-benefit, and then the pricing and reimbursement approval, HTA assessment, if you will, for different markets. And that is the value. What does the medicine bring to you over and above how the patient is currently treated in a given indication? And when you're developing medicines, the requirements from different regulatory bodies, so FDA, EMA, MHRA now, are nuanced. There are slight differences in how they treat safety data, how they might treat efficacy data, etc. But they should all congregate around a theme in a given trial design or trial program. I think the issues come probably a bit later when you're trying to build an evidence package for payers, for pricing and reimbursement purposes, for two reasons. One, what a payer wants to see is outcomes-based, so mortality or some form of morbidity measure where the patient is getting better, and quality of life, so they're more economically productive, as an example, or they can walk down to the shop to get their newspaper. So that's very different from assessing a risk-benefit, which your trial has to be geared to get through the first hurdle. But if your trial has just those endpoints, or your trials, but doesn't have that endpoints, you fail there. So you have a problem and a dichotomy sometimes, because they're not always the same. Secondly, as Barbara mentioned, regulatory works at regional level. When you go to the EMA, you get a 27-country approval. Job done. FDA, it's the whole of the US. When you talk to payers, there's one payer for the UK. Well, there's one payer for England, one payer for Scotland, one payer for Wales. There's one payer for Germany, there's one for Finland, there's one for Norway. Payers work at a national level. There is going to be a European assessment, the joint clinical assessment that's coming into effect for certain products like oncology in 2025, but it is additive. It is likely to be used by countries with less established HTA processes, but you will still have to perform a national level assessment. So that's a problem, because the way Germany assesses these products is primarily therapeutically driven, i.e. are you clinically better than what I already have? The way we assess it here is partially clinical, but also cost effective. Is the money I'm spending worth the value you bring? And we do that via cost per qualities and defined thresholds. So how you produce your evidence in both your trial and externally has to be really tailored, has to be thought through, and you need to think about it early on. Some people would, when I've worked in pharma, senior management don't really want to think about it till phase 3, frankly, too late. I mean, at earliest, you need to have a good understanding of POC, putting exploratory endpoints in your proof of concept trial, so putting that quality of life index that you might need for your economic modelling. Ideally, you want to have an understanding of both the commercial and the access landscape and what you might need to do, because it has a cost. If you have to make a 5,000 patient trial in phase 3, do a quality of life index, that costs a lot of money. It's an additional cost. And trust me, your clinical colleagues will not thank you for telling them just before they're designing the trial, 5 days before they submit their protocol. It needs to be thought of back in almost phase 1, sometimes preclinical. So think about these requirements early. Integrate it in. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, but it does have to do those three sort of 4 key payer archetypes. And just as one further warning, a lot of companies are very US-centric, and historically rightly so. The US is a big market, different pricing altogether. Since Inflation Reduction Act, there's a huge impact. The US payer authorities can negotiate prices now and are doing so. So it is no longer the land of milk and honey, as some pharma companies used to think. We're going to see a natural sort of equalization of the access environments, and there's an increasingly health technology assessment aspect to that market as well. So don't think a US package is going to be okay, because you'll get access in the US and you'll get access in most of Europe and some of China and Japan. You need to think globally about your evidence.
I think that's an incredibly important point, and one that I would absolutely reinforce to all early stage companies, is that you must start thinking about this really early. I mean, I completely agree, Phil. I mean, when I started in the industry, 20 odd years ago, people would start thinking about it, after phase 2. And now, I mean, any startup that's pitching, I mean, basically you need to have thought about pricing and reimbursement. And that's certainly something that we absolutely drill into our companies on the KQ Labs program. I mean, it's very bewildering, though, because there's so much variation between all of these countries. And in a way, it's easier to say, oh, well, okay, I'm just going to focus on the US because it's one market and it's huge. And now you're saying, actually, well, maybe that's not going to be enough anymore because that's changing. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to change things quite significantly. Do these payers talk to each other? Is there any sharing of best practice? Do you see them getting out of their silos, or is it really different and rigid in each country?
So yes, they do share out, and there are forums like Benelux where they all get together and they assess medicines together. So one country will do the HTA assessment, another will do the price negotiation where that happens. There's Venosa, it's now changed its name. There's Valletta it's in Europe. There are, I mean, if you take the GBA in Germany, they are very defined. When the European JCA was being defined, the GBA said, you can do it, we won't care about it, but you can do it if you like. We'll still do our own assessment, thank you very much. So, I mean, they're very independent. And the reason for that is because it's German taxpayers' money, and they're responsible for it. The European Commission isn't responsible for that. We still fund our healthcare systems at a national level, and that's why payers, who are making primarily an economic decision, value for money, are going to focus at a national level. So, I mean, yes, there is collaboration. There's some things they do talk about. A lot of stuff they don't. So pricing, for instance, they shouldn't really be sharing. You do sometimes have it happening, but if pharma companies find that out, they can take there are legal avenues to stop that. But HTA's assessments, and yes, absolutely, they do, and they will look at what other, for instance, the way NICE assesses. Then Australia, Canada, half of the Nordics use exactly the same methodology, slightly varied, but they'll look at the NICE assessment, and half the job's done already because NICE did it. Right. So yes, they do share. They share on the health technology assessment front, less on the commercially sensitive stuff, which is kept normally confidential.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, thank you. So, Claire, bringing it back to the subject of the panel, which is connecting global innovation. So how do we know what success looks like here?
How do we know what success is? So can we compete on a global scale?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I am optimistic, but I'm a big believer in the Greta Thunberg prophecy that hope is not a noun, it's a verb, and we must do hope. I think that life sciences is the only sector now that can get the UK out of the doldrums that it's in, and we all have our part to play in it. But I wanted to touch on the 3 R's that the panel have really articulated today, which are resources, regulation, and reimbursement. So in terms of resources, we've talked about talent, we've talked about infrastructure. There's not enough money around, and it's been absolutely dire in the last 12 to 18 months from an innovation perspective, and that then bleeds out into the ecosystem of service providers. What have we got to do? We've got to do more like they do in the US and like they do in Switzerland, where there is 100% funded innovation, rather than this piecemeal, we'll give you 50% or we'll give you 70%, and you've got to find the other 30%, because companies are falling down. They're falling down. I heard someone talk in February about, the mantra now is survive until 25. And I was like, you'll be lucky to survive getting out of this room with an attitude like that. You cannot be telling people that they've got to hold on until 2025. We are seeing the funding landscape getting a little bit better, but we're not there yet. So interest rates have got to come down. That will certainly help. From the other end of the spectrum, pharma companies, and certainly, Michel, you can talk from this perspective, we're getting another patent cliff coming in the next few years. So there's tens of billions worth of assets that are going to go over that cliff. So I think we'll see more pharma venture funding coming in and more partnerships. So that'll help from the VC perspective, the seed funding, the Series A, and those larger deals as well. We've talked a little bit about scale. Scale doesn't just have to be in Cambridge or in London. We're talking about global innovation. We're talking about the UK as a whole. We have wonderful sites in other places, and there will be other opportunities that come. Let's not let a crisis go to waste. When Novo Holdings bought Catalent, it's clear to see that they're going to consolidate and divest some of the assets that they have. So I'm willing to bet that there'll be at least 3 sites that will be up for sale in the next year. What are we going to do with those as a UK ecosystem? Let's not mothball them. Let's not sell them off like they did with the vaccine manufacturing centre. So let's think strategically and as a whole. I can talk politics, can't I? Because
well, yes. In fact, the last.
I'll talk about it a little bit. So in terms of regulation, across the board, there's a big focus from each of the political parties, maybe not some of the minor and right-wing ones, on life sciences and major investments. But there is a real push on regulation. So how do we make the UK a place that people want to come with innovation? They want to grow their companies here, and they want to have their products approved here. And regulation is the one thing that they've really identified. We need to make it as simple as possible. Yeah, we didn't make it very simple with ourselves from a Brexit perspective, but again, we've got to make the most of this. So how can we simplify regulation? A few years ago, in the UK, 25% of all phase 1 clinical trials in Europe were done here. Why can't we do that again, and why can't we keep that going? So there's a push
because other countries have actually really got their act together on clinical trials.
They have, but we've still got the infrastructure here. We've still got the talent here. We've still got the patient base here. So why not? And also what you're saying about reimbursement, we need to get those 2 things closer together: the regulation and the reimbursement. And I know there's a big piece of work looking at how we can simplify that regulation and nice procedure. I know there are some people that certainly would like nice to go away for.
I think quite a few.
Permanent.
But they're not.
But they're unfortunately not. So there is a premise to look at those 2 things and try and bring them close together. What we haven't talked about yet is the Biosecure Act and what that means from a regulation perspective. Now, there are a number of takes on this. So I spoke to some folk from whooshy a few weeks ago, and they're like, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It'll be absolutely fine. And what they're doing to try and manage this crisis is to put more money into their venture fund so that they can then fund innovation themselves. But from a UK legal perspective, I heard a great lawyer from Washington speak a few weeks ago, and he was asked a question about UK companies will eventually want to sell their products in the US. If they've done any work in China at any point, will it be scrutinized? Because essentially, that reimbursement is coming from a US-based organization. And he went, in simple terms, yes, they will be scrutinized. So you've got to think now, not just about how you're going to reimburse it, how you're going to get it to the US, but where are you putting your studies? So again, it's a real opportunity for us to nearshore that work, to bring it back. What's the expertise that we have? What's the infrastructure, the talent, the scale-up possibilities that we have here that means that we could potentially bring some of that in and help to grow the ecosystem, UK PLC, and really compete on a global scale again.
That's a really interesting point. So mindful of the time, and you mentioned politics. So today we have a general election. One quick fire piece of advice to the government, whoever comes in. So like literally not more than 20 seconds each. Claire, do you want to start since you're on a roll here?
Absolutely. So there was a point earlier around if you're going to the US, double the amount of money you want and double it again. So to the politicians, the amount of money that you're going to give to UK life science, double it and double it again.
Great, thank you. Phil?
If for the UK specifically, try and take out the adversarial nature of the HTA process here. The NICE process, while it's based on strict methodology that York developed, the way it's designed, it's adversarial. They issue an appraisal consultation document in the middle, which basically normally 75% of the time rejects the medicine, and it's used as a cosh to beat the pharma manufacturer over the head with. It's a very adversarial process. Right. It needs to be that needs to be taken out. Okay. The evidence needs to be assessed properly.
Interesting. Thank you. Orestis?
Yeah, I'll echo Claire's comment about funding.
Right.
I think especially with the Cambridge hat on, Cambridge has outperformed with very little resources over the last 10 years. Pretty much on a global scale. Every pound you put into Cambridge, you get a multiple out. So keep investing in Cambridge is a safe bet.
Great.
I would say, firstly, change their anthem from "Things Can Only Get Better" to the Rocky anthem, which was what Matthew said earlier. That would be the first thing. But I think, and you've already doubled Claire's comment about investment, so I won't say that. So what have I got left? So I think basically it's thinking about policies that reinforce each other around innovation. So if you're doing a talent and skills, or you're doing an NHS policy, or whatever policy you're doing, make sure that that sits with your life science strategy or industrial strategy and have them all reinforce each other.
Great. Michel, finally.
Yes, we talk about translational research. If the government, and not just in the UK but in Europe, keep reducing the investments in academic basic research, there's nothing to translate. So that would be my advice, increase those fundings again.
Yeah, great. Well, let's hope the government's listening, whoever they are. So thank you very much. You've joined me to thank the panel very much.